Hey everyone, it's Tuesday. It's 3 o'clock. That means it's Tech Tuesday. So the FCC has issued a report and order for their broadband consumer labels. Some people call them broadband nutrition labels, and I will be right back and we will walk through that. Hey there, thanks for joining me. This is Rick Uzzi with Broadband, no, not Broadband, told me just give me Tech Tuesday. So Tech Tuesday today. So I'm going to be covering these broadband labels. And again, these people have called these broadband nutrition labels because when you look at them, they look like the label that you might see on a can of soup or something like that. So that you're in the grocery store and comparing two items, you can see how much salt there is, whatever, sugar, fiber, whatever else is in there that you can compare, vitamins, that kind of thing. So this is a way for consumers to be able to look at two broadband services side by side to make it easy for them, number one, to find this information, number two, so that it's very standard, so they can easily compare from one provider to another and then make a decision based on that. So the FCC has been talking about this for years. They brought out some sample labels in 2016, and these are similar to that. They've added some information. They took a lot of feedback from stakeholders, including internet service providers and other kinds of interest groups around these labels, and they've come to a conclusion on that. So there is a report and order out, but it's also a notice of future proposed rulemaking. So they want to, in this as well, ask some questions on some items that were a little bit not yet decided or that could change in the future. So they're asking questions on that as well. So you see here, you've got FCC requires broadband providers to display labels to help consumers. They're calling it the Empowering Broadband Consumers Through Transparency. It was released on November 17th. It was adopted on November 14th. There are some files on here. So you've got the news release, which we're going to look at, and then there are statements from Chairman Rosenworcel as well as Commissioner Starks on this. I don't know what the vote was. I looked for that. I couldn't find it. But the FCC right now is split 2-2 as far as Republican and Democrat. And I'd be surprised if anybody voted against this. I think everybody would agree this is a good idea and something that can help consumers out. So I wouldn't be surprised if this was a unanimous vote. I just didn't find that real quickly when I was looking. So let's take a look first at the news release. This provides a lot of information as well as a sample of the label. So you see here, FCC requires broadband providers to display point-of-sale labels to empower consumers to comparison shop among companies and plans. So if you are a broadband service provider, whether you're providing broadband via a wired fixed service or a mobile service, this is going to apply to you. So it doesn't matter what size you are, you're going to have to do this. Although if you're a smaller operator, which they say 100,000 subscribers or less, or maybe it's less than 100,000 subscribers, then you have a little bit of extra time to get this in place, but everybody's going to have to do this. So just be prepared for this, and there's some timelines that we'll go through here as we look at the report and order. So the FCC today unveiled new rules that will, for the first time, require broadband providers to display easy-to-understand labels to allow consumers to comparison shop for broadband services. The report and order approved by the Commission creates rules that require broadband providers to display at the point of sale labels that show key information consumers want: prices, speeds, fees, data allowances, and other critical information. Chairwoman Rosenworcel said, for over 25 years, consumers have enjoyed the convenience of nutrition labels on food products. We're now requiring internet service providers to display broadband labels for both wireless and wired services. Consumers deserve to get accurate information about price, speed, data allowances, and other terms of service up front. So just a few things, real short here, summary. So prominent display, so ensures that the consumers see their actual label, not simply an icon or a link to the label, so it needs to be right there, the full label. Easily accessible to the consumer in their online account portable. Needs to be machine readable to enable third parties to more easily collect and aggregate data. And then there are some further refinements in the further notice of proposed rulemaking on ways that it can further refine and improve the rules. And again, they're looking for comment on that. Then there's an example of the label here. So again, as you can see, it looks like a food label in a sense that you'd find on a can of soup. So you got your broadband fax and the provider name, that would be the brand name of the provider, service plan name and or speed tier. So they will allow the provider to just put the service plan up here, which could be like Super Boost Internet or something like that, which is surprising that it's an and or an or, because I would think that they'd want right up front the speeds. The speeds are on here, but consumers, for comparing things, you could have two providers that have the same name, like a gold plan, and they could be totally different. So I'm surprised that they would not require the speed up front or up at the top here. And then whether it's fixed or mobile. And then you can see here there's some, depending on the service, and what they're going to offer or not offer is what gets filled in here. So this monthly price is or is not an introductory rate. So if it is, then you would note that here. If it's not, then that's all you put. But if it is an introductory rate, then you have to say, if introductory rate is applicable, identify the length of the introductory period and the rate that will apply after the introductory period concludes. Then again, this monthly price does not require or does require a certain year contract, and only if required, they need to provide a link to the terms of that. So it might just say this monthly price does not require a contract. If it does, then it would say it requires a contract, and you have to list all the information. Not all the information, you got to list a link to the information. Then additional charges and terms. It's got provider monthly fees. That's not really an additional charge. I guess that's the charge, but your basically your monthly recurring fee, because there's nowhere up here that it has that I see. Oh, I take that back. I'm sorry, totally missed that. So you got your monthly price right here. So this is where the monthly price would go. So if it's $60 a month, that would go there. So this would be an additional provider monthly fee. So this, for example, it says itemize each fee. So this would be something like an equipment lease, for example. So you might have your modem lease $10 a month or something like that, or possibly premium, let's say managed Wi-Fi service, $5 a month. Those kinds of things could be listed there. One-time fees at the time of purchase, that would be your setup fee. That could be a equipment purchase if it's a one-time fee instead of a lease. Early termination fee, how much are you charged if you terminate a contract, which would be noted up here if you have a contract. Then government taxes varies by location, it says. So they decided not to put taxes on here because that is going to be difficult for ISPs that have different locations. Then discounts and bundles. This was something that was added. A lot of these things were added to the 2016 label. So customers could click here. Potential customers could click here to see if there are any bundle offers. If you get your internet with voice service and video service, then there's a bundle price, and any links to such discounts and pricing options on that website must be provided there. And then the service provider needs to list whether or not they're participating in the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's the program that was part of the Infrastructure Act that provides $14 billion, makes it available for subsidies. It's a $30 subsidy per month, unless you happen to live on a tribal land. Then it's $75 per month, and that would go to people that have that qualify for certain federal certain federal programs for low-income households, free lunches, those kinds of things. If a household qualifies for that, then they can qualify for the ACP. And the way it works is the service provider has to sign up to participate in that, and then a consumer can go to the page where they can find the Affordable Connectivity Act, and they can see who participates, and they can sign up with that service provider. And then the service provider provides them a discount of whatever the ACP amount is. So if it's $30 a month, let's say it's a $60 plan, then the person on ACP can get it for $30. If it's a $30 plan, then the consumer who signs up for ACP can get it for free. And then the internet service provider gets paid back by the government on that. So it's a simple yes or no, but they have to list this sentence right here. This has to be on the label, whether or not they participate, and it has to have a link to this Affordable Connectivity page. What's interesting about that is if the service provider does not participate and a consumer is looking at different service providers in the area and one participates and one doesn't, if they click over here, well, they'll see yes and they'll see no, basically. So they might see yes from one provider and they'll see no from the other. And then also if they click over here, then they'll see others who happen to participate in the program that might be in their area. They got to put their speeds right here in the plan. Typical download speed, typical upload speed, and typical latency all go here. data included with the monthly price. So they have to list how much data is included, for example, how many gigabytes, and then any charges for additional data usage, so much per gigabyte. And then they have to have a link to their network management policies and their network privacy policies right here, where consumers can look at that and see what kind of network management there is. For example, if they go over, let's say they go over the usage, or if it could be something where if they transfer a certain amount of data at certain times of the day that, they could get throttled. There could be all kinds of management policies that would be too hard to describe here on a label, so they have a place where you would link to that. And there's a customer support number right here that has to be on there. And there's a link to a glossary of terms that they have to link to right here. And then each plan needs to have a unique identifying number. And that identifying number is a combination of various things. And I'll look through that. So those are the basics. And now I'm going to look at the report and order. So if you want to hang with me, I'll go into some more details on that, on what is going to be required for these ISPs. I'm just going to highlight some things in here. So you see this is the report and order, and further notice proposed rulemaking. And you can see the table of contents here. There's a lot of information in this, so I'm certainly not going to cover it all, but I did want to highlight some things. For example, here, some highlights. So this is part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was a requirement that directed the Commission to require broadband internet service providers to display in the form of labels certain information regarding their broadband internet access service plans. So again, the FCC put out voluntary recommendations in 2016, and now these are being kind of codified here, and this is a requirement of the IIJA. In this report and order, we adopt rules requiring ISPs to display at the point of sale labels that disclose certain information about broadband prices, introductory rates, data allowances, and broadband speeds, and include links to information about their network management practices, privacy policies, and the Commission's ACP, Affordable Connectivity Program. We also adopt requirements for label format and display information, or display location, to ensure consumers can easily compare a provider's services and services among different providers. We also seek comment on further steps we can take to ensure that consumers have the information they need to make informed broadband service purchasing decisions. Specifically, we seek comment on issues related to more comprehensive pricing information, bundled plans, label accessibility, performance characteristics, service reliability, cybersecurity, network management, privacy issues, the availability of labels in multiple languages, and whether the labels should be interactive or otherwise formatted differently so the information contained in them is clearer and conveyed more effectively. So in addition to, if you're an internet service provider, in addition to having to get ready, for what's in this report and order, if you have any comments on that, you might want to look through the proposed rulemaking, and you will have an opportunity to comment on that. Let's scroll down here a little bit. Here we go. So we looked at the label. So we went through this. So broadband service subject to the label requirement. At the outset, we make clear that the label requirement applies to broadband internet access service plans. So basically everybody that's offering broadband. It says, currently defined as a mass market retail service by wire or radio that provides the capability to transmit data to and receive data from all or substantially all internet endpoints, including any capabilities that are incidental to and enable the operation of the communication service, but excluding dial-up internet access service. So if you're a fixed wireless provider, if you're a mobile provider, if you're a fiber cable modem provider, if you're a dial-up access provider, you don't need to worry about doing this broadband label, which is probably good because your label would say your top speed was 56K or something like that. So no labels for dial-up operators. Broadband Consumer Label fixed and mobile, we adopt one label requiring the same information in the same format for both fixed and mobile broadband service offerings. And that's to make it easier to compare. There were some people that said you should have two different labels, but they went with one label. So as we saw when I looked at the label, it either said fixed or mobile on there at the top. Contents, they've got pricing, and again, there's a service plan name that's up there. And that service plan name, again, that could be whatever the service provider calls it. So it says consumers must be able to differentiate each plan a provider offers. The instruction in the 2016 broadband label directed a provider to identify its plan by speed tier, while providers may continue to identify their plans by speed, for example, 300 megabit per second or 500. They may also differentiate their plans using terminology of their choice, like gigabit connection, Performance Pro, or Blast Internet. Or in the case of mobile broadband providers, 4G or 5G, because we require providers to display critical information about each plan elsewhere in the label, including speed metrics. The plan itself need not be identified by speed tier. So again, I probably would have said still keep that at the top of the label, but they're saying, you can put the plan name up there. You can still put the tier up there, but you can put the plan name up there and not the speed. Monthly price. At a minimum, the base monthly price for the standalone broadband service that we saw was up there, not bundled with other services without additional taxes and fees. They talked about maybe having an all-in. Here you see we disagree with commenters that recommended ISPs aggregate the monthly price identified on the label with any other discretionary fees and governmental taxes, creating an all-in price, kind of like a drive-out price. We agree with providers that it may be difficult to implement. Taxes vary according to location. Installation fees may vary according to the consumer's location and dwelling, for example. So you have to drill in to get that information. Introductory rates. If a provider displays an introductory rate in the label, it must also display the rate that applies following the introductory period. So if you have an introductory rate, it's a year and you get the service for $40 a month, and it's a gig internet tier, and after a year it goes up to $60 a month, that needs to be on there. They say they agree with those commenters that argue that the label should also clearly disclose either the length of the introductory period or the date on which the introductory period will end. So that's usually going to be a length. It might say introductory, again, $40 per month for 1 year. And after 1 year, it goes up to whatever that amount is. Billing and other discounts. We require providers to display only the retail monthly broadband price before applying any discounts, such as those for paperless billing, automatic payment, autopay, for example, or any other discounts. Providers must be clear about the conditions for discounts. Contract plans must display the length and the term on the label. Must also disclose any applicable early termination fees. Bundled plans. Providers offering broadband internet access service bundled with other services may note via a link in the Click Here section of the label where they describe other discounts, as we saw in the label. They're seeking comment in the accompanying further notice that whether they should in the future require labels for bundles that include broadband service. So that would be a totally separate label for bundled service, assuming that's going to be not popular among internet service providers, because it just makes it, again, more complicated for them. Additional monthly charges and one-time fees. The label must display recurring monthly charges the provider imposes on top of the base price. And again, that could be equipment lease, for example. Providers must give each fee a simple, accurate, easy to understand name. Providers must list fees such as monthly charges associated with regulatory programs and fees for the rental of leasing of the modem and other network connection equipment. So that would be, for example, USF fees if that comes about on broadband, or other kinds of regulatory fees. The label must include the name and cost of each one-time fee assessed by the provider when the consumer signs up for service, such as a charge for purchasing a modem, gateway or router, an activation fee, a deposit, an installation fee, or a charge for late payment. So that was the one-time fee we saw. Also, fees that the provider will impose if the customer cancels their broadband service before the end of the contract term, as mentioned, the early termination fee. And then finally, they must disclose any charges or reductions in service for any data used in excess of the amount included in the plan. They must also identify the increment of additional data, for example, each 50 gig. And if applicable, disclose any additional charges once the consumer exceeds the monthly data allowance. Taxes require ISPs to state under additional charges and terms that taxes will apply and that they may vary depending on location. So that's going to be the same for everybody on the label. And then we get to performance information. So first the consumer's comparing speeds, and now they can look at performance. So speed and latency, they require providers to disclose in the labels typical upload and download speeds and typical latency. Many commenters that urged us to include the same information in the label about speed and latency as appeared in the 2016 labels. Should maintain its existing requirements for disclosing speed and latency and continue to permit fixed ISPs that participate in the Measuring Broadband America program to disclose their speed and latency results. So that is a program that a lot of providers are providing information on. So I've got a link here. So this is a report that comes out once a year. This is the report that came out in December of 2021. So late last year, 11th Measuring Broadband America Fixed Broadband Report. Interestingly enough, these things come out kind of late. You can see here this validated data collected in September and October of 2020. So this was in the midst of the pandemic, I guess the end of the pandemic period there as far as the worst part of it. So you see here, the goal of this program is to measure the network performance realized on a representative sample of service offerings in the residential broadband consumer demographic across the country. This representative sample is referred to as the MBA panel. Thousands of volunteer panelists are drawn from the subscriber bases of ISPs, which collectively serve a large percentage of the residential marketplace. So they're actually looking at, they've got people that, consumers that are with these broadband providers that are participating in this, and they're getting real-time data. So that's what this is about. So you can see there's a summary of key findings in here. You've got speeds, latency, packet loss. For example, I'm just going to click down here. I'm not going to show this thing at all. I will link to it. But you can see here, so you've got variations in performance and measured speeds, and then might be kind of hard to see here, but you got these participating providers here that they're showing. I'm assuming there's more. I don't see AT&T on here, for example. So you got CenturyLink, Cincinnati Bell, Frontier, DSL. These are all DSL, Windstream. Then you've got cable, that would be Charter, Comcast, Cox, Mediacom, Optimum. And then you've got some fiber operators. You've got Cincinnati Bell, Frontier Fiber, and Verizon. So they're showing, this would be your speed measurements. Then you've got, scroll down here, you've got your, this is ratio of 80 to 80, consistent median download speed to advertised download speed. So they're looking at actual to advertise. This is a lot of good data. You got packet loss, or this is here is latency, excuse me, latency by ISP. And you can see that, you know, your highest latencies here. This was your DSL right here. Then you've got some of your cable operators right here. Then you got your lowest latency right here with your fiber operators. This is percentage of consumers whose peak period packet loss was less than 0.4%, between 0.4% and 1%, and greater than 1%. So you've got that data here. And again, you've got your lowest packet loss looking at fiber. So again, they can compare the technologies of these as well. So that's what that is when they're referring to this MBA program. It's not a Master's of Business Administration. So I think that's also referenced as well down here. Yeah, thus the purpose for satisfying this requirement, fixed broadband service providers that choose to participate in the MBA program may disclose their results as a sufficient representation of the actual performance their customers can expect to experience for the relevant speed tier. So if they're participating in this MBA program, I think what that's saying is that, again, there are real consumers out there that have test equipment in the home that's been provided to them, and that information is reporting the speed and latency data to the FCC, and therefore that information can be what they base their results as far as the representation of what these speeds are. Fixed broadband service providers that do not participate may use the methodology from the MBA program to measure actual performance, or may disclose actual performance based on internal testing, consumer speed test data, or other data regarding network performance, including reliable, relevant data from third-party sources. So they can't just make a claim. They do have to have some basis for making the claims on what that representative service would look like. They say we also agree with those commenters that believe that low delay or latency is important, low latency. We therefore require providers to display their typical latency for that particular speed tier, either based on the MBA methodology or other relevant testing data. Peak data usage or peak usage data, we decline to adopt, so they're not adopting, a requirement that provides the providers tie their actual speed reporting to peak usage periods. So as an example, you know, you might get on the internet at 2 a.m. and you're going to get much better throughput than you might at 8 p.m., you know, when kids are home, parents are home, people are streaming, you know, like 4 different TVs and whatnot, you know, so they don't need to base it on peak usage periods, but I'm assuming it's, you know, they can't do it at 2 a.m. in the morning either, especially if they're participating in this MBA program. It takes it at various times of the day, but they don't have to say, okay, during peak usage times, it's this. It's so much worse. That doesn't have to be on there. Packet loss, we decline to require providers to include information on packet loss in the label, so that's not required. The vast majority of commenters observe that consumers have little understanding of what packet loss involves, and argue that such information should not be included in the label as it provides little benefit to the average consumer shopping for broadband service. Packet loss is less important than upload and download speeds and latency, and may actually lead to more confusion for most consumers. We do, however, seek additional comment about whether there are other service characteristics beyond speed and latency that ISPs should display in the label. So that's later on in this document. Network management practices, we require that ISPs include in the label a link to their network management practices, as we saw, that was in the label. We're not persuaded, however, that the label should include detailed information about network management practices, specifically those related to blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization. So in other words, that doesn't need to be on the label. They still do need to have a link to that information, but it does not need to be on the label. We conclude that a link to the ISP's network management practices is sufficient, and that any more detailed information in the label is unlikely to benefit consumers comparing broadband internet access service offerings. Including such information on the face of the label may overwhelm consumers during the purchasing process and might impose additional costs on providers. And I would agree with that. So, the more you put on this label, I looked at this a couple of weeks ago. There was I forget, it was Cornell University or some university, put together recommendations for the label, and they had all kinds of stuff on that label. And I was looking at the old label and their label. While it had a lot of information, it did seem kind of overwhelming. So I think if consumers have the basic information on the labels, then they can drill in further and get to things like network management practices. That's going to better serve most consumers. Providers must, however, either include necessary information on their websites about blocking, throttling, and paid prioritization, or transmit such information to the Commission to comply with the current transparency rule requirements. So that's surprising there. So it says they can do one or the other. So they have to either include it on their website or they have to send it to the FCC. We also seek comment in the future whether in the future the label should include more granular data about a provider's network management practices and additional specifics about how such information should be conveyed to the public in the label or the provider's website. So they are looking for additional comment on that. Then there's the ACP. Again, to ensure that we're using every tool available to promote the ACP, we require providers to include a link to indicate whether the provider is participating in the ACP. So it's going to say yes or no, and again, it has to have that same language, including a link in the broadband label to more detailed information about the ACP and how to qualify for the program is appropriate and sufficient. Each provider must disclose in its labels whether it participates in the ACP and include the following statement. And we saw that statement on the label right here. That has to be on there along with the link to it. We also recognize that because the ACP has not been made permanent by Congress, this is interesting, by the way, the ACP may end when the appropriated funding is exhausted. So they're admitting here, that the ACP has only got a certain amount of money in it and may run out. And it's interesting because they're trying to promote it as quickly as they can, get as many people signed up as they can. And what's interesting about that is the more people that they get signed up, the sooner the money is going to be gone. Right? So there's 11 to 12 or 13 million, somewhere in there right now that are signed up. When I looked at how long this might last based on how much money there is, and $30 to $75 a month, plus maybe $100 subsidy for equipment for some percentage of consumers, it's only going to last a couple of years. Could be less than 2 years at this point. So at that point, this will be over. So it says, we therefore direct the Wireline Competition Bureau and the CGB to ensure that any wind-down procedures for the ACP developed as directed by the ACP order address the need for providers to remove or modify the ACP-specific language on the broadband label. So they're saying basically that anything ACP on the label could be temporary depending on what happens with the program. Privacy policy, consistent with the 2016 labels, we require providers to include a link in the label to their privacy policy on its website. Consumer education, we saw that at the very bottom. It says we require that providers include at the bottom of all broadband labels a link to the Commission's website, where CGB will post a web page with a glossary of terms used on the label. So that's where you can find out what is, I think, was it latency? Yeah, latency is on the label. Yeah, what is latency and what about the maximum speeds? There'll be more information on that there. Then additional content, we declined at this time to require providers to include additional content in the label. Several commentators suggested that we include information about service reliability in the broadband label, such as the ISP's resiliency. That was from the New York City, or New York City supported that. But they're not going to require that. So there's nothing that needs to be on there as far as, uptime, those kinds of things. Format of labels. We adopt the Commission's proposed format of the 2016 labels so that they resemble the well-known food nutrition label that was mentioned. I was going to go back here. I just had a thought about this additional content. And, one thing that I do as a consumer, I think this is great to have this information. I can look at that. But just looking at that's not going to be how I make my final decision. I'm also going to be looking at reviews. If I can find what looks like objective reviews on some service, then I look at that as well. So things like, whether the service is always down or packet loss, always getting packet loss or having issues, that kind of thing. That's going to be something that consumers compare if they want to dig a little deeper by, again, as a good consumer, looking at different options. So the broadband labels will definitely help, but I would still go further if I'm going to be looking at a service provider as to what kind of reviews they get from customers. Let's see, anything else here? Machine readable format. So it's required that this be in machine readable format to make the information included in the label available to the public in that format, in a format that can be easily processed by a computer without human intervention. And there's a few reasons they want to do that. Advances the statutory objective of providing consumers with sufficient key information, will enable third parties to more easily collect and aggregate data for purpose of creating comparison shopping tools. So in other words, a third-party site could say, what's the best, how can you compare internet providers in Des Moines, Iowa? So then you look that up and they can pull that information very quickly in a machine readable format and display it. It doesn't have to be the broadband labels, but they can display a comparison chart or make that a little bit easier for people to compare there. From a third-party website. Also helps ensure that the data third parties use is both accurate and up-to-date. So again, these third parties can then get that quickly without having to, look at broadband labels and not be able to retrieve that information through a machine, let's say through a process. Let's see, also promotes both competition as well as transparency and accountability. Further, requiring ISPs to post machine-readable label information will allow the Commission to more easily collect data about broadband markets. So again, that FCC can also go out and get the data more quickly. Will make the data more easily available for research as well. The record shows that these benefits can be achieved at a low cost to providers. Originally, people said it can be too hard. You see here, ACA Connect said it would tax the resources of small providers with limited in-house technical resources, but they said, we do not believe that publishing the label information in a spreadsheet file would impose a high technical burden. And if that's all they're talking about, then yeah, that's not that hard, right? They just have to put the data in the proper format in a spreadsheet, and that's pretty much it. And they'll provide support. They mentioned that they'll provide support for anybody that needs help with that. That should be no problem. Unique plan identifiers. So again, that was the really long, ugly number at the bottom. And that's just, again, to be able to differentiate between these different plans. So each service provider, they can have a bunch of plans throughout the country, depending on how big they are, different speed tiers, those kinds of things. And each one of those tiers needs to have a separate ID. We require ISPs to develop unique identifiers for each of their plans and attach them to the broadband label. The unique identifier should consist of a unique ID for fixed plan or mobile plan, F for fixed and M for mobile, followed by the broadband provider's FCC registration number, so their FRN. So you've got an F or M, and then you've got their FRN number after that, and ending with a provider chosen string of precisely 15 alphanumeric characters, uniquely identifying the specific plan within the broadband provider's offering. So that last 15 characters is up to the ISP. They can put whatever they want. They just need to be unique, but they have to have the first numbers there, the letter, and then their FRN number. That has to be specific to that provider as well. Accessibility for people with disabilities. ISPs could best ensure accessibility to printed and online broadband information by relying on well-established legal requirements included with the ADA and by following the guidance developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative. So there's just some guidance on that. Display in languages other than English. We require that providers display online and printed labels in English. We also require providers to make labels available in any of the languages in which the ISP markets its services in the United States. And I think that means on those pages. For example, if the ISP's marketing materials on its website are available in Spanish, the Spanish version of the website must display the associated broadband labels in Spanish as well. So I think if you've got an English version of the website and somebody goes to the pricing page, you don't necessarily need to have 4 or 5 different broadband labels there. But on your Spanish language website, you need to have your Spanish broadband label there. We recognize that the need for multi-language accessibility goes beyond translating labels directly from English. We therefore encourage providers to review their translations for context and vernacular language by native level speakers, work directly with community members to ensure the language is not only accurate, but also easily accessible and understandable to target audiences. And that is an issue because we have Spanish web pages on our website, and we're a broadband company, so to speak, providing wholesale broadband services, that kind of thing. Fairly technical stuff, DOCSIS proactive network maintenance and carrier grade NAT and all these kinds of things. There's lots of technical terms. We can't just take the English and throw it in Google Translate and have it come out where it's going to make any sense generally because of the technical terms. So, we have to have a Spanish person, somebody who understands Spanish, also somebody who understands the technology, translate that so that it makes sense in that other language. So that's required for these labels as well. Point of sale and label display location. We require ISPs to display the label at point of sale. As for time, we define point of sale as the moment a consumer begins to investigate and compare broadband service plans available to them at their location. So to me, that means if you're on a website and you're viewing their plans, I want to purchase either blue, silver, or gold, whatever they happen to be, then it needs to be there. Or maybe when you click on one of those plans, then the label is there. But I think it'd be best that you've got the broadband labels right there where people can look at them as well. As for location, we define point of sale as both ISP websites and any other channels through which their service is sold, including ISP-owned retail locations, third-party owned retail locations, and over the phone. So those last few were interesting. Over the phone, how do you do a label over the phone? Broadband labels do not need to be included on mass marketing channels or prior to customers specifying their service location. So I see that as if you get a postcard in the mail, hey, sign up for a broadband service, the broadband label doesn't need to be on there because you're just kind of scattershot marketing and somebody may or may not take you up on that. The Office one is interesting also because it does mention that you can hand somebody a hard copy, but of course any links don't work on the hard copy. So links to things like network management and privacy policy, maybe you'd have to provide them a piece of paper that has, that's stapled to that has those items. It mentions websites here. Providers must display the labels after the consumer enters any required location information. So if you're, type in your address, then that label's got to come up there. Providers must display the actual label, not simply an icon or a link to the label. So you can't just say, here's, click here to get our label. It's got to be on that page. We do not require any particular font size for the label information at this time. However, providers should ensure that the labels are prominently displayed on any device on which the consumer accesses and views the labels, including mobile devices. So hopefully this does not make providers go to mice type on these broadband labels where it's like you need a magnifying glass to read the details. I'm sure they're all going to be, they should all be readable. If there's anything else here that I wanted to look at, that I think was the highlights. Oh, wait a minute, there's something. Grandfathered plans and archival labels. So this is important. We require that ISPs display labels for plans currently offered to new customers, but decline to require that they create and display labels for services used by current customers that are no longer available to new customers. So, and this is especially relevant to mobile providers, because a lot of times, you'll sign up for a mobile plan, and then 2 years later, they've been through like 5 different plans. In fact, I should really do this now. I haven't done it in a while. You should call your mobile provider and say, hey, what plans do you have now? Because a lot of times they get better and they don't tell you. So anything that is not currently being offered to new customers, they do not need to, from the get-go, create broadband labels for that. While we reject requiring ISPs to create labels for older plans or to continue to display labels for plans no longer available to new customers, we are persuaded that they should maintain an archive of all labels that have been removed from their website or alternate sales channels. We require ISPs to archive labels for at least 2 years after the service plan is no longer offered to new customers, and the label is no longer displayed at the point of sale. So they want to make sure that if you signed up for something a year ago, 2 years ago, up to 2 years ago, that you can get access to that label to make sure that you're getting that is providing the service that you signed up for. I think that's what this says. Providers are not required to make the archive labels available to the general public, but they must provide any archive label to the commission or a current customer upon request. Specifically, a provider must allow an existing customer to request and obtain a copy of the archive label for the plan to which they currently subscribe once the label is no longer displayed at the point of sale. This will assist consumers in determining whether they are getting the service expected based on the price and quality that was offered. Direct notification of change of terms. We decline to adopt a requirement that ISPs directly notify consumers about changes to the terms and conditions in the displayed labels. So, quite often what happens is the speed goes up, maybe for no additional cost. So that a lot of times that's the change. So you don't have to notify that. Although usually service providers will want to notify customers about that because it looks good for them. Let me see if there's anything else in here. Implementation timelines. When do you have to do this? So we require that all ISPs comply with the rules we adopt today within 6 months and 1 year compliance periods. So this is a little bit confusing, but I'll get to it here. Following publication in the Federal Register of Notice that OMB has completed review of the adopted rules. Based on the record, we decline to adopt an exemption from the label requirements for smaller providers. We agree with OTI that we must ensure that every consumer benefits from the labels. The Infrastructure Act directs the Commission to adopt labels for all ISPs and does not distinguish between larger and smaller providers. We nevertheless recognize that implementing the label requirements may require some additional time. We therefore establish a 6-month period for most providers to come into compliance before the new requirements take effect. So basically, you've got 6 months, I think, from the time that it's published in the Federal Register to get this into place for most service providers. And I don't know if it's really most, probably most have longer because most are smaller than 100,000 users, which we'll see here. We agree with those commenters that argue that allowing providers an additional 6 months following announcement in the Federal Register that OMB has completed its review of the rules will ensure that most ISPs can implement necessary changes in a cost-effective way that makes sense for their individual business models and potential customers. We therefore find that 6 months represents a reasonable time frame for most providers to take steps to ensure that labels are adequately displayed on websites, that links to additional information are effective, and that the required information is provided in accessible formats. We do, however, adopt a 1-year implementation period for providers with 100,000 or fewer subscriber lines. And I think that was it, 100,000 fewer. So, so think about that. So most internet service providers, I think most are under 100,000. So you've got obviously your major internet service providers, your national guys, your Comcast, AT&Ts, Verizons, your big mobile operators, and they certainly address most consumers. But as far as the number of ISPs, your smaller ISPs, your ones that are represent a state may not have 100,000. They might be in a portion of a state. They could be just in a city. So there are ISPs that have got literally 1,000 subscribers, 500 subscribers. There's 10,000, 30,000. There's quite a few ISPs that are under 100,000 subscribers. So they get a break on this and won't have to put that into place as quickly. So Then they get into the further notice of proposed rulemaking here, and I'm not going to go through this, but you can see some of the topics: accessibility and languages. So they're asking questions in here, So they're kind of priming the pump with some questions, requesting comments to these questions, or from on other topics as far as price information, performance information. Should there be more information about performance? Cybersecurity, other service characteristics, that kind of thing. So there you go. So I see here, Calvin says, in Houston, AT&T have a monopoly, which fiber is not available everywhere, which left you, I guess, with DSL. So yeah, AT&T surprisingly has quite a bit still of DSL in the ground. They're trying to overbuild that with fiber, but there's certain areas that's just going to take longer. And that tends to be areas, unfortunately, where there are either fewer customers or it's maybe low income. Fewer customers for one reason or another is because there's just fewer customers geographically. You've got people living further away, or it's an area that's maybe lower income where fewer people can afford internet, so therefore there's fewer customers that way. So those tend to be left out, as you say, maybe with DSL, because those are the last to be overbuilt. And in some cases, it's also because one reason they're the last to be overbuilt, especially if it's, let's say, very few customers in an area for geographic reasons. In other words, they're very far apart. It's very expensive to go ahead and get fiber to those customers, because the further customers are away, the more expensive it is to connect somebody up. And then you've got fewer customers per mile, or maybe even several miles per customer. So the revenue that you get back from that takes a really long time to recover that. So that's why all of this broadband money is available now through things like RDOF, where a lot of money has been deployed from that. And then you've got ARPA, a lot of money has gone towards broadband for that. You've got the USDA Reconnect program that covers rural areas. You've got the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which this particular requirement, these labels are underneath, as well as the Affordable Connectivity Program, as well as the BEAD program with $42.45 billion that's waiting to be distributed. Once we know where all these unserved areas are, all this money is becoming available to help folks like you get connected to fiber, because fiber is the preference. It's going to be the fastest, as we saw real quickly there. It's the fastest service. It's the one that can get you certainly most easily to symmetrical speeds. You've got the lowest latency generally with fiber. So it tends to be more reliable because unlike certain RF technologies, over glass, it's a lot more reliable. So that is the preference, although it's not always possible everywhere. But I think for the most part, a lot of areas in the country will be covered by fiber. And if you've got AT&T in your area, I think you'll be seeing fiber sooner probably rather than later. I'm thinking that they are going to want to get that taken care of, especially if their DSL speeds are below what's considered served. They're going to want to get that taken care of so that that money does not go to somebody else who could overbill them using federal dollars. So maybe you'll have some luck getting that taken care of. So that's it for the broadband labels. Finally out. Again, they were voluntary, the recommendations back in 2016. But now the rules are out. And then again, once this is in the Federal Register, internet service providers, if you are an ISP, you will have 6 months to get that done once that's in the Federal Register. If you're over 100,000 customers, if you're under that, then you got another 6 months. But if you're under that, you should still get it done. I don't think it'll be that difficult, and I would go ahead and get that done so that you have that information available to potential customers, because that will make it easier for people to see what you offer. So I would recommend that everybody get that done as quickly as possible. I think it's something that's needed, and I would start working on it now, even before the Federal Register comes out, because you can see from this notice what's going to be required. So I will go ahead and link to the notice and that MBA document and anything else that I think is relevant here at the end of this. I'll put a comment in there and I'll pin that so that you can have access to that. So thanks for joining me. If you are an internet service provider and you need assistance with anything from provisioning your customer devices to diagnostics to end user support, whether you need that 24/7 or just need some help, overflow calls or weekends or that kind of thing, whatever it might be, we have a host of managed services that we can provide for you on a per subscriber basis. So look us up on the web, send us an email, give us a call. We'll be happy to talk to you about that. So thanks for joining me. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button. Click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Click the thumbs up if you like the video. I'd appreciate that. And make sure that you join me next time. That'll be tomorrow for Broadband Deployment News. I'll be back at some point during the day live for that. So if you click the notification bell, then you know when I'm live and you can watch if you want. Choose not to. You don't have to watch. You can watch later. That's fine. But I appreciate your watching anytime you do. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.